My brother Daniel always said he'd protect me. He made that promise the day our dad died. When I was only 9 and he was 15, standing in the cemetery gripping my hand so tightly it hurt, whispering that no matter what happened, he would never let anyone hurt me, and for most of my life I believed him. He was my protector, my hero, the one who stood up to bullies in school, chased away bad dreams, and stayed up nights helping me study when anxiety made my hands tremble. But all of that began to crumble the day I saw him standing under the willow tree in the park, holding hands with the one man I had prayed every night would disappear forever. My stalker. My name is Clara Bennett, and the story I'm about to tell you isn't one I ever wanted to live, but once you've been hunted by shadows, once you've felt love morph into something terrifying, you either speak or let the silence destroy you. It started during my 3rd year of university in Boston, where I was studying English, literature and working evenings at a quiet coffee shop just off campus. Life was slow and poetic, filled with books, scented candles, and journal entries about someday love. But then one night as I left work, I noticed someone watching me from across the street. A man in a dark hoodie, unmoving, face obscured, yet somehow familiar. I walked faster, heart thudding, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound dramatic. But over the next few weeks, the feeling of being watched intensified. I'd find my locker open when I knew I'd locked it, books rearranged in my dorm room, and then came the first note, a single sheet of paper tucked inside Wuthering Heights, my favorite book, reading, "You breathe like music." And from there it escalated. Flowers left on my doorstep with no sender, phone calls that hung up the moment I answered, a sense of dread that began to follow me like a second skin. I tried to brush it off, tell myself it was just paranoia, until one night I found a gift box on my pillow wrapped neatly with red silk ribbon, and inside was my missing bracelet, the one I'd lost months ago during a family trip, with a card that read, "Found it for you, Clara. You're welcome." My blood ran cold and I finally called Daniel, who had always lived a few towns over and worked as a freelance photographer. He dropped everything, showed up the next morning with his camera bag, his protective instincts burning in his eyes, and moved in with me until this blows over. At first I felt safe again. He installed cameras around the apartment, walked me to work, even confronted a guy who looked at me a second too long. And I started to breathe easier, even laugh again, but the stalker didn't stop. He started sending photographs printed in black and white, showing me sleeping, brushing my teeth, crying alone in the shower, and once, worst of all, one of me and Daniel in the kitchen with the message, "He's not your shield, he's your key." I was spiraling, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, so we moved to a new apartment in a new town far from school, but even there, the messages found me, this time through email and burner accounts filled with twisted poetry like, "Your shadow dances lovely when you think no one's watching, and soon we'll be in the same frame." Phrases that felt like blades grazing skin. The police shrugged, citing no real threat, but I knew what was happening. Someone was planning something, building toward a moment, and I could feel the clock ticking in the silence. And then it happened, one gray afternoon in early spring. I left work early and took the long way home through Willow Creek Park, needing fresh air and space to think, and that's when I saw them. Daniel and the man from the photographs standing under the willow tree, heads close, holding hands, Daniel smiling in that soft, rare way he used to reserve for Mom, and my heart stopped, not because of the betrayal, but because I felt the world tilt, like everything I'd believed was suddenly fiction, like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. I couldn't move, I just stood there, clutching my coat, watching as my brother, my protector, leaned into the man I feared most and whispered something that made him laugh, and that laugh, I knew that laugh, I'd heard it outside my window on sleepless nights. I dropped my phone, it clattered to the pavement, and they turned. Daniel froze, mouth parting like he wanted to speak, and the stalker, whose name I would later learn was Eli Granger, simply smiled and said, "You were never supposed to see this part." I ran, blind with fear, crashing through bushes and traffic, ignoring Daniel's voice calling after me, and when I made it home, I locked every door, pushed furniture against it, and sobbed until I could barely breathe. He lied to me. The one person I trusted most had been working with the man who had stolen my peace, and worse, I didn't even know why. I didn't answer Daniel's calls or messages, though they poured in. "Clara, please talk to me." "It's not what it looked like. I can explain," until finally, a text that chilled me to the bone. "You were never supposed to be scared. Just moved." That's when I knew this wasn't random, this wasn't madness. It was a plan, years in the making, and I needed to know the truth, so I drove to our childhood home, now empty since Mom moved to Arizona, and searched the attic, where Daniel kept all our father's old things, and in a box labeled Documents, I found letters, hundreds of them, written by a woman named Elizabeth Granger, love letters to our father, dated years after he married Mom. Letters that spoke of their hidden son, and their plan to someday tell the truth to the children. I froze. Daniel and Eli were brothers, half-brothers, and I was the obstacle between them, the favorite, the one who got everything Eli never had. And when I found an old photograph of Eli as a child, holding a red ribbon, the same ribbon that wrapped my stalker's gifts, I finally understood. They'd orchestrated this together, not to kill me but to break me, to push me out of the way so Daniel could inherit everything, and Eli could see me fall from grace. I took the letters to the police, but even with proof they needed more, so I planted a trap. I told Daniel I forgave him, invited him to meet me at the lake house Dad left me, and when he arrived, smiling cautiously, Eli behind him, I confronted them, pretending to cry, to beg for the truth, and Eli, proud of his work, confessed everything. How he watched me for 2 years, how Daniel gave him access, how they planned to fake a psychotic break so I'd be institutionalized and Daniel could take guardianship of the estate, the moment Eli said. She was so easy to manipulate, like a moth begging for the flame. The police, listening through a wire, stormed in, guns drawn. Daniel and Eli were arrested, both stunned, both screaming about loyalty and betrayal, but I felt nothing. The trial dragged for months, but the evidence was undeniable, and in the end, both were sentenced for stalking, conspiracy, and emotional abuse. It's been 2 years since I testified, 2 years. Since I moved to Oregon and changed my name to Lily Carter, trying to rebuild, trying to find peace, though trust comes slow and love even slower. But sometimes in the quiet of dusk, I walk to the edge of the forest behind my cottage and hear wind in the trees that sounds like a whisper, and I remind myself that survival isn't about what you endure, it's about what you become afterward, and I, Clara Bennett, or whoever I am now, have become something steel-forged and unbreakable, because even when the hands that claim to protect you turn out to be the ones holding you down, you can still rise, you can still run, and most importantly, you can still win.